everyone. I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I'm here with Brien Foerster. Brien Foerster is a sort of an Indiana Jones, and I think a lot of people know that already, but I have a short bio here that I'll try to read. He's an expert on the longheads, which we call the Paracas skulls or longheads. In essence, what I consider to be the Anunnaki skulls, and it looks like he has a museum. I'm not sure you still have that, Brien, your museum in Peru?
Yeah.
Okay. And you've written articles for GrahamHancock.com, it says. You've been in 10 episodes of Ancient Aliens, numerous radio shows, as well as mine in the past. And let's see, Coast to Coast AM, Jeff Rentz, Project Camelot, and a new video series called Unsealed, as well as L.A. Marzullo's The Watchers, episodes 6 and 8. You've become an authority on megalithic works in South America and basically the elongated skulls that have been found really all over the world, because I know there are some found in Malta, and I don't know if you've been there yet. So with that in mind, do you want to pick up that bio and sort of augment what anything else that people should be aware of for you?
Well, unlike some other researchers who are, I guess, global in nature, like Graham Hancock or whoever, I tend to specialize in the megalithic sites at Peru, Bolivia, Easter Island, parts of the Pacific, and Egypt. I'll be going to Turkey with Hugh Newman and Andrew Collins in May of next year, as well as Jordan. So I'm trying to specialize myself more than being somebody who can answer any question about, about anything of the unexplained.
So what I wanted to ask you is, in terms of your latest travels, where did you just get back from?
Well, I actually just got back from conferences in New Zealand and Australia, and we had the opportunity to see what are called the Gosford glyphs, which some people believe are Egyptian hieroglyphs that are about 2,500 years old on the east coast of Australia. So that was very interesting.
Okay, well, fascinating. I'm glad you made it to Australia. We had tried to see those glyphs in Australia, and time didn't allow. There were some logistical issues with that. What did you think of that?
Well, they're much more impressive than I thought they would be, because I've seen photographs of them, and of course, skeptics believe that they were done by university students 20 or 30 years ago, or possibly someone 50 or 70 years ago. But the amount of erosion on the surface of the stone and the carvings themselves, I think, indicate that they're much, much older than, far older than 100 years old, and they're almost impossible to find. They're not on the side of a highway. You have to have a local guide take you to find them, because you have to walk more than a mile, much more than a mile into the bush in order to see this deep crevice where they're located. They're on two walls parallel to each other. There's also what seems to be a tomb very close to them, and because I look at ancient stuff all the time, I think that they're very old, and they have been decoded by Yusuf Awiyan and Mohammed Ibrahim, who are Egyptian hieroglyphic experts, and they believe that the style of hieroglyphics date from about 500 BC.
Yes, okay. Would you agree with that?
I'm not sure if they're that old, but they are definitely older than the skeptics say.
Okay, just to say that if I'm hearing some sound issues at your end, so I don't know what the people listening out there are hearing. Just want to make sure that that we have a good connection so people understand what is being said. So if there are people in the chat and they can report, my producer can let me know if anyone is having issues with hearing you, but hopefully it'll be all right. So we have a lot of photographs here that you did give me, I think from your recent travels. And would you want to show those now, or do you want to describe kind of your background a little bit more in terms of how you got into the elongated skulls, how you just even got into this area of research?
Well, I've been a traveler all of my life. I've been to about 80 countries. I've had a childhood fascination with ancient places like Stonehenge, etc. But it was mainly when I moved or visited Peru the first time that I saw all of these amazing megalithic structures, and none of the local guides could properly explain who made them. They said that the Inca did. You could clearly tell that there was some kind of technology involved that was far beyond what the Inca possessed, and in some cases beyond what we possess. And that's really what started my focus. It was the fact that nobody could really explain to me who did this work and when that really drew my attention.
Okay, and why did you really start looking at the skulls and stick with that? You know, like, was it an emotional resonance with the skulls?
Well, it was mainly when I visited the small museum that I'm now the assistant director of. Senior Juan Navarro had one of these skulls on display, and I just found it fascinating. It was actually a mummified skull, so it still has the skin and the hair on it. The hair is dark red, which is not Native American looking. Then he told me that he had a number of them in his house, and I asked if he could bring them to the museum, which he did. And after that, I just found them so fascinating that we started to develop a collection. Now we have more than 45 of these. And looking through the internet, I could find no good archaeological information about them except that they were the result of ceremonial head binding, which with some of them I found very difficult to believe. And since there is no expert in the world that I could find as regards them, I sort of took the issue up for myself.
And how many years ago was that?
Actually, that was about 6 years ago, but I've intensively been involved with them ever since.
Okay. And I saw that there was a mention of the crystal skulls, and I guess you were really talking about this other person who is a colleague in your bio. And I just wondered, what is your take on the crystal skulls? Have you investigated that at all?
Not very much. I've seen one of the famous ones in the British Museum, which some people think is probably a 19th century German copy. Stephen Mailer, who's my friend and an expert on the crystal skulls, is completely positive that they are ancient receptacles of energy and knowledge. And he's been able to tune into he's been able to hold them himself. And he's normally a very left-brain person, but when he interacts with the crystal skulls, he receives a lot of very interesting ancient information from them. So I believe that they're ancient devices of some kind.
Okay. In terms of your research, are you using your own intuition or psychics or anything of that nature in order to sort of reveal what's really going on with the longheads?
Yeah, we're using everything possible. I'm a scientist in background, but I don't limit that. I don't limit my left brain to being what I utilize. We've had a number of dowsers. We use a lot of local informants, native people, medical people, people who've been able to do three-dimensional reproductions of what they look like, and you have those are some of the photos I sent you. So I try to gather any information from anyone that I think is pertinent to try to figure out who these people were, because the Paracas culture, for example, died out 2,000 years ago, leaving no descendants. And so all of the archaeological information is speculative as to who they were and where they came from.
Okay. All right. So in terms of of getting into this area and your latest discoveries or investigations, would you like me to bring up the photos at this time and show people what we've got here? Do you have a preference on which photo I start with?
We can just go with whatever you decide to put on.
I guess I'm clicking on the first one here. It says Siamar.
Yeah, that's Marcia K. Moore. She does three-dimensional modeling of the skulls based upon photographs that I sent her. And she's a brilliant artist who lives in Florida. And this is what she thinks the Paracas looked like.
Oh, all right. Okay. Fascinating. Go to this one, and what would you have to say then about this particular one?
Yeah, that's actually the cover of my new book, because I've done quite an exhaustive study of where the elongated skull people lived in Peru and Bolivia, and I found a lot of correlations with wherever you find the megalithic structures in Peru, you find elongated skulls, and they're actually, most of them are located along an energy grid line called the Path of Viracocha, which goes from the Peru-Ecuador border down south easterly into and through Bolivia. So most of the major megalithic sites are also located along that line.
Okay. And what is your book about? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's mapping where elongated skull people lived in Peru and Bolivia, where, when, and then a timeline as to where the first ones may have first occurred and when the last ones existed. So there are a lot of correlations between different cultures. The Inca culture is quite major in this book because some authorities believe that the Inca actually had elongated skulls. They're not shown in the depictions that you see in most books because most of the Inca died out just before the Spanish conquest happened, and the Inca themselves never did portraitures of themselves, but we're getting insinuations that they may have been not simply a powerful culture, but actually a very special race of people.
Okay, well, one thing I notice is that my understanding is, according to the descriptions, these are supposed to be white people, the elongated skull beings. Did you have any understanding about that?
Well, there's a possibility because there are legends about people called the Viracochans who were described in the oral traditions of being quite tall in stature, very intelligent, highly intelligent people, and were quite fair in skin color, as well as possibly having reddish hair. So they were quite distinct as compared to the general Native American population.
So in this particular depiction of one of these beings, they're not really taking that into account, I guess.
Not really, and the thing about the blue face is that actually is a depiction of what is displayed in the Central Museum in Lima. They recently discovered, by unwrapping some of the mummies, that these people had either tattooing or they heavily used makeup on their faces, and blue was quite a predominant color. They don't know why they would use blue, but it just makes them, again, it makes them a very mysterious people.
Very interesting. So the ones that were discovered, I guess, recently, were they actually long heads, or were they other, shape of heads?
Most of them have long skulls or long heads like this. The museum in Lima has more than 300 royal Paracas mummy bundles. Mainly were discovered in the 1920s, They've been kept in storage in the museum in Lima since that time because the mummy bundles are so delicate, and because of scant financial resources, they haven't been able to open that many of them up. But they just opened up a new display of the Paracas culture about a year and a half ago, and they have these representations of them having this, rather interesting facial characteristic, I guess you'd call it.
Right. Now, are these facial kind of characteristics, the drawings, the painting of the faces, are they depicted in any murals or carvings on walls or any artwork that you've discovered?
Nothing refined. Actually, the Paracas were excellent at weaving. So in some of their weaving depictions, they have different colored faces and people with different colored hair. Of course, the standard idea being that native people of the Americas tend to be darkish in skin color and have black hair. Depictions of blonde hair and red hair and blue faces and green faces and yellow faces are in many of the textiles.
They are, okay. Do you have, just out of curiosity, here in the collection, because I haven't had a chance to review it before we went live, any of those pictures of those textiles?
No, but they're easy to find on the internet. If someone just goes into Google Images and puts in Paracas textile, you'll see a number of them that show that.
Okay, great. Just moving along here with these pictures, is this particular shot a very interesting skull that looks like you or someone is holding in hand? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, this one was recently found in Ecuador, actually. So the elongated skull people were not simply in Peru and Bolivia, but they were also in parts of Ecuador, mainly in the jungle area of Ecuador, which has been largely unexplored. There's the famous Tayos cave that some of your listeners may have heard of. Ecuador hasn't been as extensively studied as Peru and Bolivia, so I think there will be a lot of interesting things to come out of there. Of course, Donna has done a lot of work in the past in Ecuador and has found some fascinating artifacts. So I look forward to going to Ecuador in the future and see what else I can discover.
Okay, and so this is not your, you didn't actually shoot this particular picture, or because you weren't there?
No, but people send me photographs all the time from different parts of the world of anomalous things they find.
All right, fascinating. Yes, and we know Klaus Donna. We've done one or two interviews with him. Wonderful man and a very interesting explorer, as well as collector of all kinds of odd things. Have you met him?
Yeah, I was at a conference 2 years ago in England that Hugh Newman organized called Megalithomania, and so I spent some time with Klaus.
Excellent. So, okay, so we're moving here along here, and what would you say about these really unusual-looking skulls?
Well, that's actually a mummy that is in a museum in Austria, and it's been identified as having come from the Paracas or Nazca area, which is where I am. Medical people have determined that this person died 4 years old, so that's a very young child, and you can see how large the skull is, and also the reddish hair color. That's the classic red hair of the Paracas. So it's not red hair as in Irish or English or Scandinavian. It's a very rich burgundy color, and that again is part of the mystery. Is why do so many of the elongated skulls that we find have red hair and not black hair?
Absolutely. Very strange. And I guess you know Graham Hancock, you say you've written articles for his site. He also, I guess, has done some investigation around the red hair peoples and sort of talking about the link with Neanderthals. You're aware of that, right?
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of work being done by many different people now about the connection between Neanderthal and us, but also the origins of red hair are still mildly mysterious. It's believed that the original people who had reddish hair lived in the Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan area many thousands of years ago. And the oldest elongated skulls that we're finding also seem to be from Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan.
Really? That's very interesting. Have you ever gone to Turkey? And, well, I think you were at Göbekli Tepe, right?
No, I'm actually going with Hugh Newman and Andrew Collins in May of next year.
Oh, okay. Because I just got back from there, so it'll be very exciting to have you go down there and see what you see. I don't know if any longheads have been discovered in Turkey. Have you heard about that?
Actually, Andrew Collins has been doing some work on that, and he's been finding some evidence of elongated heads in Turkey.
Okay. Because we have some amazing photographs from the museum there and so on, and I'd be glad to share that with you. I have done already one sort of video diary from my trip down there. Very extraordinary place, just amazing finds.
Yeah, it seems people send me photographs from Turkey quite often. You know, some absolutely amazing sites that very few people have heard of. Of course, Peru's famous and Egypt's famous, but Turkey deserves a lot more recognition than it's been given so far.
Yeah, it is interesting how it's sort of, for some reason, remained a bit off the beaten path, even though the place is filled with sites and amazing things. I mean, we barely scratched the surface. We were there for 9 days and just couldn't get, we couldn't even get around everywhere. We couldn't really afford to go all the different places that you are able to go in Turkey, but I think it's a really important place in terms of our ancient history. What is this photograph that I've got on the screen now? This is quite a strange one.
Yeah, that's actually in a cave in Bolivia. So the path of Viracocha that I described to you earlier, as I said, goes through Peru and then enters and goes through Bolivia. And there's a mountain called Tunupa, which means the mountain of the creator or the mountain of creation. And it's a giant volcano that rises above the salt flats. And there are several caves in and around that volcano that have ancient burials with elongated, mummified skeletons in them.
Yeah, I mean, what is this, like a drawing?
No, this is a photograph.
A photograph. Okay, it just looks so extraordinarily strange. It doesn't even, it really looks more like a drawing than anything real.
Yeah. Well, I've been to a couple of the caves where this volcano is, and there are the remains of elongated skulls and skeletons. Unfortunately, of course, many have been the victims of tomb robbing, and the elongated skulls especially have become collector's items in the U.S., probably Canada, and Europe, and so they're constantly being plundered, and the heritage of Peru and Bolivia is being lost as a result of that, as well as our knowledge of many of these sites.
Right. Okay. Well, in terms of this next photograph, what is this exactly, and what do you think they were used for?
Well, this is actually Egypt. It's a site called Abu Ghraib, which you've probably been to.
Yes, I have, and it's interesting. I have a feeling maybe these have been moved, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's just I was putting out a bunch of photos for you, and that one happened to be one that I just grabbed. It's just one example of the lost ancient high technology of Egypt. As you said, these bowls are not in their original position. they've been lined up for some reason, but there's no proper explanation from Egyptologists as to what their function was. They tend to say that were ritual bowls for bull's blood or something, but the holes, as you can see, are quite high up, so it'd be very difficult to drain them. Seem to me to be, an example of lost ancient technology that probably existed before the dynastic Egyptians did.
Yeah, that site is really a bizarre site. The alabaster, I guess, spaceport they call it, in the middle of the place is really quite stunning. I'm not sure. I think these used to be on the edge when I was there. It looks like they've actually moved them, so that's interesting. Don't know what they're doing with them there. But I'll just move on here, so, to see what else you've got. Okay, this skeleton. What would you say about this?
Well, the most interesting thing about it is, again, it's from Peru, and you can see that the head is the size of the torso. So archaeologists explain away all elongated heads as being the result of a cultural practice called cranial deformation, where the shape of the skull is altered starting with a newborn baby. But with that practice, you can change the shape of the head, but you can't increase the volume. And as you can see, the head is way out of proportion in comparison to a normal human being or anyone who's had standard cranial deformation done to them.
Absolutely. Well, do you ever, I don't know, do you ever get into debates with people about that issue?
Yeah, well, of course, when you talk to archaeologists, they won't listen to anything other than the fact that these people bound their heads and that was it. They won't entertain anything in terms of the possibility that these may not be standard human beings, or that their ancestry may be very different from what they say it is. Of course, the standard story is that all people, native people of the Americas, crossed the Bering Land Bridge, 12 to 15,000 years ago. They will not entertain the idea that people could have actually sailed to the Americas from different parts of the world, and that this may be an example of an ancient bloodline of very special people that either died out or interbred with normal people, resulting after a series of generations that the elongated skull look disappeared because of the genetic nature of who they were mixing with. So I'm basically just trying to gather more and more information as I can to develop I think, a strong story.
Sure. Well, it would seem that the fact that they're larger than normal skulls, and you can't just by binding something make it larger, that seems to cinch the deal to me. But I don't. Obviously, if they're closed-minded, they probably won't even go there. everyone. I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I'm here with Brien Foerster. Brien Foerster is a sort of an Indiana Jones, and I think a lot of people know that already, but I have a short bio here that I'll try to read. He's an expert on the longheads, which we call the Paracas skulls or longheads. In essence, what I consider to be the Anunnaki skulls, and it looks like he has a museum. I'm not sure you still have that, Brien, your museum in Peru?
Yeah.
Okay. And you've written articles for GrahamHancock.com. It says you've been in 10 episodes of Ancient Aliens, numerous radio shows, as well as mine in the past. And let's see, Coast to Coast AM, Jeff Rentz, Project Camelot, and a new video series called Unsealed, as well as L.A. Marzullo's The Watchers, episodes 6 and 8. You've become an authority on megalithic works in South America and basically the elongated skulls that have been found really all over the world, because I know there are some found in Malta. And I don't know if you've been there yet. So with that in mind, do you want to pick up that bio and sort of augment what anything else that people should be aware of for you?
Well, unlike some other researchers who are, I guess, global in nature, like Graham Hancock or whoever, I tend to specialize in years old on the east coast of Australia. So that was very interesting.
Okay, well, fascinating. I'm glad you made it to Australia. We had tried to see those glyphs in Australia, and time didn't allow. There were some logistical issues with that. What did you think of that?
Well, they're much more impressive than I thought they would be, because I've seen photographs of them, and of course, skeptics believe that they were done by university students 20 or 30 years ago, or possibly someone 50 or 70 years ago. But the amount of erosion on the surface of the stone and the carvings themselves, I think, indicate that they're much, much older than, far older than 100 years old, and they're almost impossible to find. The megalithic sites at Peru, Bolivia, Easter Island, parts of the Pacific, and Egypt. I'll be going to Turkey with Hugh Newman and Andrew Collins in May of next year, as well as Jordan. So I'm trying to specialize myself more than being somebody who can answer any question about about anything of the unexplained.
So what I wanted to ask you is, in terms of your latest travels, where did you just get back from?
Well, I actually just got back from conferences in New Zealand and Australia, and we had the opportunity to see what are called the Gosford glyphs, which some people believe are Egyptian hieroglyphs that are about 2,500